G20 world leaders have held an online crisis talk to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic. Will they come up with policies to help avoid a deep worldwide recession? And the pandemic is spreading fast in the U.S. and Europe, but relatively under control in many Asian countries. So what are the reasons? Welcome to The Point. Coming to you live from Beijing, I'm Li Chouyuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. Now, in an unprecedented move, world leaders have held an emergency G20 summit virtually this week to discuss economic responses to the coronavirus pandemic. Amid plummeting oil prices, growing worldwide unemployment, and a global recession well underway, member governments and international institutions such as the World Bank will be looking to put forward, as they put it, a coordinated set of policies to protect people and safeguard the global economy. But are they too late? And will their proposals be enough? Will this online summit make up for the lack of international cooperation so far? Well, to help answer these and other questions, I'm now joined in Brussels by the Director of EU Asia Center, Fraser, and by Skype, Professor of Economics, Gong of the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So let me start by asking this. This summit is being held at a time when the pandemic rages across the world, posing a grave threat to human health and safety and causing huge damage to the global economy. Mr. Cameron, what does the world expect from this emergency virtual summit?
Well, I think they should have expected it to convene much earlier than it had. The problem is that the G20 is rather an unwieldy organization, and much depends on the personalities involved. And you have an 84-year-old chair of the summit who's not really, I think, grasped the full enormity of what is going on. If you think back to what happened in the last big financial crisis, 2008-9, it was a very energetic British Prime Minister then, Gordon Brown, who took the initiative. It was followed by Obama in the US and Merkel and Sarkozy in Europe. So that created a kind of dynamism to get the G20 mobilized, and it obviously brought a great reduction in the fear and anxiety at the time. This time round, it's too little too late.
Too little too late. Do you agree with what's being said there, Professor Gong?
Well, I concur with that. I think it's indeed too little, too late. I hope it's not too little. Well, I don't know what's going to come out of this, but I think what's really need to be done is something really dramatic and, in a sense, revolutionary, because we have never seen something like this before. I mean, the entire world basically grinds to a halt. We had this 1918 Spanish flu, where at the time the world wasn't as connected as it is today. We don't have many flights, going around the world. There are not many trade going around the world. But today it's a totally different world. It's a globalized world. It's an interconnected world. And we basically, this pandemic is shutting everything down. So I think we really need something really drastic out of this G20.
Yeah, every aspect of our lives are hyper-connected now. And while attending the G20 Extraordinary Virtual Leader Summit on COVID-19 via video link, Chinese President Xi Jinping said that it is imperative for the international community to strengthen confidence and act with unity and work together in a collective response against COVID-19. Professor Gong again, what will be China's role in advancing a quote-unquote collective response to this pandemic?
Well, I think this is a time when China really needs to take a leadership role here. This is the country that has first recovered from this. Well, in a sense, we've already recovered from this. And besides that, China is indeed the center, the factory of world manufacturing. The world is counting on China to provide the things, counting on China to keep the machines cranking. So I think it's vitally important that China stepped up, and indeed we did. We are doing that to send a very strong message to the world that China is willing to cooperate with everyone right now to help fight this pandemic and also keep the economy flowing. We're shipping a lot of things abroad. We are also providing a lot of things, donations included, assistance to the European countries, and we played very much of a leadership role, and I think we need to continue to do that.
And China has indeed demonstrated its willingness to assist other countries during this global crisis. The Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Luo Zhaohui says China is actively sharing its anti-epidemic experience with other countries during a press conference Thursday morning. We have that soundbite. Let's take a look.
As COVID-19 is spreading across the world, China continues to work hard to ensure the successful epidemic control at home. And we have also shared our experience with over 100 countries and organizations. We have held nearly 20 video conferences in which Chinese experts have given their advice to their foreign counterparts. They believe these meetings are very transparent and informative. And since February 27th, we have sent 7 groups of medical experts to 5 countries, including Iran, Iraq, Italy, Serbia, and Cambodia. We have also actively shared our control and diagnostic plans, which are translated into many languages and uploaded to the websites of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Chinese embassies, and consulates.
So that's the statement coming from the country's Vice Foreign Minister. Mr. Fraser, how do you evaluate China's efforts on international cooperation so far?
Well, I think it's been pretty good after a poor start. I think there was a lot of criticism of China at the beginning for not being as open as it could have been. But I think since then it has really stepped up to the mark, both in terms of sharing its expertise and also sending medical equipment, supplies, experts around the world. So I think one should give China credit where credit is due. I think the priority now, of course, is to try and find a vaccine, and that's a global effort. And I hope that, all the participants at the G20 agree today that that has to be the #1 priority, and done on a shared basis. It's not something that any one nation can do on its own, let alone try and keep on its own. It has to be shared for the sake of the whole world.
And let me also get your take on China's role in this international cooperation, Mr. Fraser, because we have just heard Professor Gong's response. Will the summit give China a chance to lead international cooperation? Or will growing concerns of China's influence through aid sour the talks?
Well, it's against the background of deterioration in the relationship between the United States and China, and I think the blame game has started, and I think we have to put that aside. I think later on we could perhaps have an international investigation on this, but at the moment, the priority is indeed, firstly, to try and stem the pandemic, secondly, to find the vaccine, and thirdly, to get the economies going again. But you can't really get the economies going again until people feel secure that they can go back to work. So China can go back into full production, but it's got to actually get its goods to the export markets in Europe and America and get these supply chains moving. And if people are not going back to work there, then it's also a problem for China.
Yeah, and 2 of the world's largest economies only just recently ended a year-long trade war, and now the Trump administration is again attacking China as elections in the U.S. near. Now, will the current friction between China and the U.S. affect the summit talks? Will further cooperation be hampered because of Trump's statements during the critical time? Professor Gong.
Well, I first want to address this criticism about China's so-called not being open initially. I think China's reactions to this outbreak initially is certainly has room to be improved. But the question of whether we're open or not, whether we did this any cover-up. I mean, this kind of a criticism is mostly coming from Washington. Now, remember way back when President Trump tweeted, he actually praised what China has done. He said China did a wonderful job. Now, all of a sudden, when this outbreak is becoming wild in the United States, he all of a sudden changed his tone. So I think this is more of a sort of a excuse, in my opinion. President Trump finds all kinds of excuses, and most of them are foreign. He called it foreign virus. Later he called it Chinese virus. I think it's very clear to me that he's doing this trying to provide some political cover for the things he has screwed up himself. He is really, really slow in terms of responding to this. He could have ordered the companies to manufacture ventilators 2 or 3 weeks ago. I mean, just look at what Governor Cuomo has said. I mean, he has a lengthy criticism of what President Trump has been saying. So, this is not so much about, China being, not open or being covered up. It's more about whether the other countries being fast enough in terms of responding to this. So, but anyway, let's set aside this. At the moment, I think it's very important for all the countries to come together to fight this thing. And G20 summit is a great platform to at least do something about it. So that's not going to be too little. And I think China is indeed stepping up to play a leadership role in terms of coordinating policies, in terms of providing aids and assistance to other countries. Now, we have to just keep in mind that once we have recovered from this, once we have, initially we caught off guard, but once we have regrouped and used our, more of a sort of a whole of a nation approach to tackle this, the whole country is behind this. China is the first country to come up with the genetic sequence of this virus and share with the rest of the world. We did this literally in a few days. So, all these things testify that, we are doing the best we can and we'll continue to do the best we can.
And this is not the first time we're seeing Donald Trump reversing his own statements. According to a press report circulating right now, a push by the U.S. to include the phrase Wuhan virus in a joint G7 statement was rejected and lead to basically a collapse in talks. Now that the Trump administration has apparently reversed itself regarding China's supposed blame, should we expect the U.S. to adopt a different approach this time around, Mr. Cameron?
Well, I think he was getting some criticism at home for calling it the China virus. A lot of Asian Americans were being attacked and abused on the streets and their workplaces, and he suddenly realized they're actually rather an important demographic group. They'll be voting in the November elections in the States, so he's changed his tune there. I have to say, it's no point really going down this blame game road. The important point is to try and get the international community focused on the priorities just now. And of course, they will look essentially at their own interests. For example, the US is worried about the decline in oil prices, which affects its own shale production at the moment. There's all these kind of national interests at stake. But over and above that, there is an international agenda out there related to the Sustainable Development Goals, related to dealing with the impact on some of the poorest countries in the world, because this virus will spread regardless of borders. So we all have an interest in ensuring that the poorest countries can tackle this as well as the rich countries.
And in a statement on Monday, the IMF's managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, predicted that, quote, a recession at least as bad as during the global financial crisis or worse is upon us. Now, given the worsening dynamics here, is the G20 simply reacting too late to reverse the trend, Professor Gong?
Well, I'm afraid we're already into this recession. We're already, 2 or 3 weeks into this recession, and I hope it's not going to turn into a depression. But I'm, a little bit optimistic. I think, given the situation currently unfolding in the United States and other parts of Europe, it's very concerning to me that we see these numbers keep climbing, and it's going to be a while before these countries will get to the stage where we are in right now, that we have almost zero new infections domestically. So it's going to be some time. I would expect it's going to be at least a month to 2 months ahead, and 2 months of basically shutting down the economy in the United States. It's a very, very severe thing. I mean, it's totally different, I think, from China, and we're going to see this coming back to haunt us in terms of China's exports to the United States, to Europe. So I think China's domestic economy is not going to do so well, I think, at least for the next 2 quarters, and it's going to have implications for the rest of the world. And as Mr. Cameron has also said, that as we get into the summertime, there's always this concern that this virus is going to spread into the southern hemisphere, and now we all of a sudden have those less developed countries have to dealing with this. So it is going to be a serious issue here.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Right, issues surrounding global health are often considered as secondary at the G20. I think this is the time for everybody to rethink and take a pause to re-strategize. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my guest, Mr. Fraser Cameron from the EU Asia Center, and Professor Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. We're going to have to leave it there.